Great. We've all gathered here collectively from around the globe to talk about how we can work better, more effectively together without having to travel across the globe. Before I start today, can we get a show of hands? How many people here are going to be hiring remote team members during 2019? A lot of people. How many people are going to be doing that for the first time or planning to do that for the first time? Smaller number, but still quite a few. The points that I bring up today are intended to help any of you, whether you are founders or executives, take away action items that you can use to run your own teams more effectively and to make your own remote teams successful. So before I jump into that, there's one point that is not going to be in this presentation today. It's not going to be covered in detail, and that's the topic of remote team culture. And that's not because that topic is not important, but it's because that topic is so important that I covered that solely in my talk here last year at Startup Grind. So for anybody who's hearing me speak for the first time, I would encourage you to go look for that. You can find it on YouTube, and that's going to be a good addition to what we talk about here today. So before we go too far then, let me just introduce myself. I'm Mark Bosma, VP of Sales at Toptal. Toptal is the world's largest fully distributed, highly skilled workforce. And we not only specialize in connecting our clients with remote talent from around the globe, we also live the remote lifestyle, the remote team dynamic every day. So over the last 8 years, we have grown our core team to hundreds, we've grown our network to many thousands, and we've grown our revenues well into 9 figures, all while being 100% remote. So then that brings us to the question of, why are we talking about remote? And as many of you know, remote teams, hiring remote team members is something that's been on the rise. And that's due in large part to the fact that as technology becomes more global in scope, so will our future teams. As technology encompasses more industries, as it expands into more demographics across the world, there will be more people with more skill sets in more areas who might be your next ideal team member, right? So just like most things in life, you have to begin with motivations. So today is February 13th, right? And looking at where we are at, that means that somewhere between 60 and 80% of you have already failed your New Year's resolutions. So congratulations, right? If we look at dieting as an example, your motivations are largely going to dictate the outcome. It's going to dictate your success. So just like your dieting plan, your dieting success determines or is based largely on the right diet, the right time for the right reasons, your hiring motivations need to be based on the right people, the right time, the right reasons. So if your motivations, for example, are simply to hire cheap talent, hire remotely, hire cheap, and save a bunch of money, your focus is going to be on individuals who probably do not have the skill set that you need. They're not going to be the fit for your team, and that cheap hourly rate is going to translate into additional hours, costly rework, and missed deadlines. But if instead you focus on finding individuals who are the right fit for your team, people who have the skills and people who live the mission, you're going to be on a path to success, on time and on budget. So then you might be asking yourself, well, where do the cost savings come in, right? Because that's kind of the stereotype that pops into everybody's mind. The cost savings come later, right? They don't come at the front. They come in the form of lower rent. They come in the form of lower utilities. They come in the form of lower payroll on average across your team. That's where you're going to find that. So you want to make sure that those motivations are set properly, or you're going to sabotage yourself. The next thing that you want to look at is, what is the structure of your company? Because the motivations for your team are going to vary depending on whether you have satellite offices, whether you have remote individuals working with members who are in a central office, or whether you have a fully distributed team. So you have to make sure that the motivations for hiring remote and expanding remotely fit within the context of your own company, your own team. And moving on then, now that our motivations are in the right place, we have to ask ourselves, what are the action items that we can take that are going to lead us to success, right? So I've organized these roughly into 3 categories. You've got people, process, and teams. And we're going to start today by talking a little bit about people, the people aspect of things. So one piece of advice that you've all heard before from any number of investors, successful business people, bloggers, whatever the case may be, is hire the best, right? Everybody heard that before? All right. Well, when you put that in writing, this is the subtext, right? This is typically what people mean. Hire the best within driving distance of your office. But the beauty about remote work is that you can actually hire the best. You can find the individuals that are the ideal fit for your team without being constrained to an arbitrary geographical location. But with that aside then, what traits do you look for? Who is it you're looking for to join your team? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. The first trait that you're going to want to look for, regardless of what the role might be in your company, is self-directed. You need individuals on your team who are going to be able to wake up in the morning, log on time, understand what their tasks are, and dive in. If you are interviewing individuals who are going to need hand-holding, or if they're the sort of person who wants to come into the office and just kind of wait to see what needs to be done, those individuals are not set for remote work. They are not for you. You want to stay away from them. The next closely related topic is proactive. You want people who understand what the mission of the company is. You want them to understand what their role is within that, and you want them to be able to fill the gaps, right? So that they can take care of all of the implicit tasks on their to-do list, not just the explicit ones. So those first 2, sanity savers, you want to make sure that you take note of that. The next one on the list is problem solvers. So all of us are going to encounter challenges during the day. Our electricity is going to go out. Our ISP is going to go down. Our computer is going to flake out. All of these things are going to happen. In a remote environment, the individuals that you hire, the individuals that you're looking to bring onto your team, have to be able to take this in stride. So when you are speaking with candidates, when you're going through the hiring process, you want to make sure that you are finding people who have some sort of understanding of this, that they plan ahead, that they have backups, they've got additional equipment, they have a plan for where they can go to find internet if their internet goes down, because it's going to be a part of their lifestyle. There's not going to be an IT department that's going to walk in and say, oh, okay, I'll solve your problems. Amazing communicators, whether it's the application, the resume, the phone screen, the video interview, you want individuals who can be amazing communicators on all levels. And this is not a grammar check. This is not spelling. This goes deeper than all of that. You want to find individuals who can convey information, convey meaning correctly, comprehensively, and concisely. Because the only worse thing than a page-long Slack post is a page-long Slack post that has no meaning. So the next point that you want to look for is experienced. You want to find people who have experience for the role, not just doing a job. You want people who have experience working remotely, because remote work is not for everybody. You will inevitably hire people who will decide 3 months in that they just can't do this remote thing. But if you find people that have a successful track record, you will have weeded out those individuals, right? The people whose personality trait does not lend itself well to remote. Time zone overlap is the next one that we're talking about here today. So you need to ask yourself, how much time zone overlap does this role realistically need? Because odds are, for many roles, you don't need a full 8 hours overlap for somebody to be able to communicate well and successfully do the job. But you have to define that for yourself. And just because you want 100% overlap with Eastern Time US hours, for example, it doesn't mean that you're constrained necessarily to finding somebody in the Americas, because there are many people who do excellent work in Eastern Europe, for example, who are more than comfortable and happy and prefer to shift to a later workday, as an example. Missionaries versus mercenaries. So with this one, you are looking to find people who are truly interested in your company. Because one of the dangers of hiring individuals for a remote team is that people will come to work simply in a remote team, right? So as you're going through the hiring process, you want to be wary of individuals whose primary motivation in the role is the fact that it's remote. Cultural fit. So this is the only piece that I'm going to include in here briefly that relates to my talk from last year. But putting it very briefly, you want to make sure that you find people who fit your full team culture and that you are taking that into account during the hiring process. So with that, then the next trick is, how do you understand this? How do you divine all of this during the interview process? And there are a couple simple things that you can do. You want to make sure that you have multiple interviews. You want to have multiple perspectives, whether that's people on your team, or if neither you nor the people on your team have hired individuals remotely before, then at that point, you can enlist somebody outside of your team to help you through that process, somebody who has done remote hiring in the past. You also can look at how comfortable and confident these individuals are during a remote interview process. Like, are they comfortable? Are they confident and professional during an interview, during a video interview? Do they have a solid internet connection? Do they have solid equipment? Does it look like they've done this before? That's another big key. And then another point that you could look at would be the idea of doing a project as part of the interview process. So whether that's a technical project that somebody works on, whether that's more of a nuanced marketing project, a sales project, mock calls, or whatever the case may be, you're trying to get an understanding of how well this individual works, how well they learn and ramp up into what it is you do before you hire them onto your team and realize that only too late. So that brings us then to the topic of process. So when we start looking at processes, we have to realize that despite the fact that remote is becoming much more commonplace, the management trends that have been ingrained in us over the course of time they're different, right? So if you look at where we've come from, right? Whether you've come from an enterprise organization where you have multiple large campuses, most of your interactions are still face-to-face. If you look at startups, many startups come from a close group of individuals working face-to-face. If you're coming straight from academia, the institutions that have birthed many of the technologies that are foundational to remote work, they are all basically working out of large co-working, co-living spaces, university campuses. So the management methods that have been ingrained in us over the course of time, whether implicitly or explicitly, simply don't serve us in a remote environment. We have to make adjustments. So the first item that we need to go over here is regarding expectations. So when you're working with people on your team, you want to make sure that everything is clearly set from the beginning. And this might be coding standards, it might be communication guidelines, it might be just simply a defined hours of availability slot where everybody is online. And this last point is an interesting one because the hours of availability that you have set may not necessarily be the definition of these are exactly the hours that you are going to work during the day. But it is simply a window of time where everybody on your team knows that they are going to be able to get responses. They are going to be able to close communication loops as they're working with each other from around the globe. The next point would be onboarding. So we need to understand that not everybody, and we should assume that nobody that we hire in our remote team is going to be able to come on site for training and onboarding. And that means that we need to re-examine what the training sessions look like. What does mentoring look like? What do do our shadowing sessions look like for remote team members? And we have to reimagine our existing processes and make sure that this works in a remote environment. So an example from my team would be with new team members who join, we have call shadowing, where they are listening in on client conversations. But they're not only listening in, we're doing it via screen share so that the new member of the team is able to see exactly what their colleague is doing inside of the platform, so they get that full understanding. It's basically emulating the idea of having them sit down in a chair next to you at your cubicle and watch what you're doing on the computer screen. The next item here is to manage for outcomes. So it's human nature for all of us to be social creatures, right? Managing by walking around is something that comes naturally to all of us. In a remote environment, that would lead to a hell of a lot of walking. So we have to have a different way of understanding the progress of our team, of the individuals within it. And the first piece of that is to just simply know what your roadmap is. The next piece would be to define all of your KPIs that are associated with that, and then to monitor those constantly. Because the ability of our team to know where they're at and to know what we are doing hinges upon that. So one way to sum this up would be with the Russian proverb, trust but verify, right? We set expectations for the team. We give them the freedom to run within those expectations. We measure every step along the way, and we communicate that back to them. Meetings, everybody's favorite. So in a remote environment, you can imagine that meetings are not going to look the same as they do when everybody's gathered into an office. And this means a number of things, but the things that you might want to consider include those up on the screen. You want to make sure that you have scheduled calls. So if you and your team are in the habit of just standing up and saying, hey, we're having a meeting, that does not work as well in a remote environment. It can, but not always. You also want to be punctual with your meetings. You want to start on time and end on time, because a meeting that ends late for you might be an inconvenience. A meeting that ends late for your colleague in another time zone might mean that they're late for picking their kids up from school. Those are the considerations that we have to make. And it requires more discipline than you would expect. Visual, you want to make sure that you are using video calls. You can see people face to face. A picture speaks 1,000 words. So you can use images, graphics, charts within your meetings so that people gain better understanding. Digital whiteboards are amazing. So the next step that we have here is planned. There should be an agenda that goes out before the meeting so that everybody who's going to be attending, regardless of what time zone they're in, has appropriate time to plan and prepare for that meeting to make the most of it for everybody involved. And you want to have them logged in some fashion. So whether that's recording the actual calls themselves, or whether you are just simply logging the minutes and the action items that come out of those, you want to make sure that that is done, because if anybody misses a call, it's life, right? This happens. If they're in an entirely different time zone, they wake up, they're online at 5:30 in the morning, your time the next day, who are they going to ask what happened on the call the day before? Where are they going to pick up at the beginning of their workday? So if you have that logged, if that's in a place where they can find it, that makes a big difference. And then one other piece here, which is important for us, is making sure that there's equal footing for all involved. You want to make sure that everybody feels included and heard, not excluded. And this typically is lumped under the idea of remote first. But research has shown that a fair environment is a reward to people regardless of their standing. And this means that if the remote members of your team do not have equal footing or fair treatment, if they are not feeling heard, it is a demotivator, right? It is going to harm the productivity of your team. So that's where the idea of remote first comes into play. So then we want to move into tools. And the first item that we have here is basically that communication is the lifeblood of a remote team. And we don't have time to go into great detail here today, but what I'm going to lay out here is more of a category and considerations for you. Because if I give details of what technologies are best and what tools are best, that's not the same as they were in 2004. It's not going to be what they are in 2040. So if you look at communication, you look at synchronous forms of communication. How are you having calls? What tools are you using to do it? The chats that you're having, how are you conducting your asynchronous communication? You want to make sure that you are logging data that people can use and find over the long term. You want to define your critical systems, whether those are CRMs or whether that's your internal custom platform, whatever the case may be, and you need to make sure that those are suitable in a remote context. And then you also want to make sure that all of the above is standardized as well. So all of these considerations need to come into play as you're trying to understand what tools you're going to be using for your team. So with that, then I think we will wrap this up. So I'm not sure where we're at for time, if we have time for questions or not.
We are running out of the time, but maybe one would be fine.
Okay.
Let's start maybe from the first one.
What tools do you recommend for managing a remote team? Okay, so the item that we just cut short, Zoom for video calls, Slack for chat. You're going to have some sort of process or project management system. So Trello, Jira, Rike, something along those lines. And then also have a solid internet connection, right? Please. And if you can, a noise canceling headset, not like a Bose headset. You want noise canceling on the mic. And they're not cheap, but they're worth every single penny. So when it comes to communication, again, communication is the lifeblood of the team. The quality of that communication makes a huge difference.
Okay, thank you so much, Mark.
Yep.
Time is over. Thank you.
Thanks.